What is going on YouTube? How are you guys doing? I'm with Adriana. We're at a random little walk area somewhere in Markham, about an hour away. Pretty picturesque, so we're gonna get some portraits, some B-roll, tips and tricks, the whole bunch. Let's get it going. Alright guys, that's the end of the little B-roll clip. Pretty picturesque place here. So now let's get some portraits. I've never been here before, so we're gonna see what we can work with. Definitely get some standing shots like she was, using the elements around us, like the dead leaves or trees, and some sitting ones, like of this bench, or yeah, something. So let's go. So we're gonna go with Adri sitting on the bench here. I'm gonna get her to sit right there to emphasize depth, okay? Because look at the pathway right behind her. If she's sitting here, you follow the bench all the way down that way. So let's see how this looks on screen now. Cool, so those are the shots. You can kind of see how she was in focus and those little dead cattails, whatnot, were out of focus, right? So I used the rule of thirds with her being, she was leaning right here and that was in the distance, so your eyes would trail off and focus on that and the pathway. So we have that. Now we're actually gonna use the cattails themselves because they look really cool. So maybe she can stand right, maybe right there, right where those footprints were. I think I made those, and maybe we'll try to get depth. So when initially Adri was right here, right? Stand like right there. When she was like that, that's the original plan. It was cool, but what I thought, there's no depth, right? Like all you're getting in the background is that kind of like weird looking building in that tree, right? If you look. And we wanted to emphasize the actual cattails, so I moved over here. She still stood there. I moved over here, so now I emphasize so much more depth, right? Look at that. It just goes on and on and on. So what we did was we used this. Adri stood close to this to show more depth, being this was in focus with her, that was out of focus, which kind of looks cool. Okay, now on to the third spot, and again, this is all spontaneous. I've never been here before. It's just kind of using what elements you think would look good and going with it. I really like the texture of this tree. Just like, look at this. Look at how funky that tree is. So maybe with Adri leaning against it, looking away, and emphasizing that texture, brother. Let's go. Good. And then stop midway. Good. And then face, here's kind of the ducks there. Yeah, all right, let's go. All right, so the original thing was, can you back up? Go back to where you were in the middle. What we did was we got Adri to stand right in the middle to, again, show the depth of the leading lines, right? Boom, like that. And it was cool, but it was too smudged, right? It was a little too hard to see. So then what I did was I got her to lean over to one side. So can you come back over here now? Right? And then we show depth with just one rail opposed to both. Right? So I got her to stay here and I just got that and her looking out at the ducks. And now we're gonna go head to another spot, another location, and I'll see you guys in the next clip. All right, dudes, so I was just changing lenses right here on this bench, still in the same area, and I kind of wanted to touch on the point of like models with portraits, right? Now, I feel like a lot of people are gonna feel like, I can't shoot portraits, man, I don't have any models, I don't have any people that are in agencies or things like that, and that's just not the case, right? I don't consider myself a portrait photographer, but when I shoot Adri, or when I shoot a couple other friends, you just find people that like being on camera, and that's it. They don't even need to be like amazing looking people, you know what I mean? Like Adri's pretty, but you don't need people who are great looking. As long as they're good on camera, you're gonna find their personality. And like portraits, I feel like are more shooting about who they are opposed to someone that has to look amazing. You know what I mean? It's all about like authenticity. So just a little thing for guys wanting to shoot portraits. Just shoot whoever. If they like being on camera, roll with it. Okay, now next clip. Alright guys, what's up? Back home, and I'm going to edit up one or two of the Lightroom photos to show you how I edit portraits, give any tips, tricks, what I can from that shoot. So let's hop on over to Lightroom. Alright, what is going on guys? Here we are in Lightroom. So I have about, I think it was like 20 or 25 of the photos edited over there, and we have the two that we're going to edit right here and there. So let's start with this one right here. Alright, I always start from the bottom and go up. Now normally I would get Adri to look the other way, right? Facing the blank area where your eyes would normally stare, but for some reason I really like her looking the other way. It almost like kind of balances or offsets the image. So, especially with her hair flowing in that direction too, I just find it looks really nice. Okay, so let's start from the bottom and work up. First thing we're going to do is touch up some grain. Maybe about 25%. This just to add a bit more of that rustic, raw look to it. Shooting outdoors, I really like adding a bit of grain, especially when it's overcast, just to give it a bit more of that moody feel. Now let's do this, get rid of that vignette, bring that to about 50%. Right there, we want a little bit of vignette, but nothing too crazy. Let's now move up to sharpness, get that to about 50 or 60. I like all my photos fairly sharp. And we're not going to touch the HSL tab right now. That's going to come into play later on, especially with portraits. That's when I will use it a bit more. Let's get a nice S-curve going. Now with portraits, unlike landscape photography like I normally do, landscape photography I may crush the blacks up about 10%, right? Maybe 7 to 10%. With portraits, it's really, 3 to 5. It's very minimal. I'm going to bring this guy to maybe 3.5. I want a little bit of that crushed black look, that faded look, but not too much. You have to be very, very careful when doing portraits because too much you can tell very, very easily. Their skin tones begin to look off. The image begins to look very muddy, very kind of like groggy, like it just doesn't look too clean. Same with clipping the whites, just a bit, right? Maybe even 5, opposed to 10 I do. Right now let's move up, get a nice contrast going here. Bring the blacks down about 25, whites up 25, get a nice contrast there. Shadows, depending on the portrait, I usually don't lift up shadows too much in portraits, and that's because I really want to emphasize shadows on their face, right? Now, because it's a portrait, having shadows on the face looks very, very nice. It looks very clean. It adds depth. It adds, it's hard to explain, but it adds more like contour, more like just, you know what I mean? Just more detail to the face. So I don't want to get rid of all of that. If I brought the shadows all the way up, look, ready? You see what I mean? It looks very, very flat, and we don't want that. So shadows, maybe for portraits, just up 10, that's it. For landscapes, usually a bit higher. And highlights, we can bring that down, maybe about 25. Usually I don't bring highlights down too much, again, with portraits, but because the snow is very vibrant, I want to bring that down a bit. Okay, and now let's further that contrast. About 25-30. Now you can see by adding contrast, that is going to saturate the photo a bit more. It's going to make the colors pop out a bit more. So, just like with my landscape shots, get down about -10 to 12, right? A little bit right there. And let's expose the photo properly because I still shoot underexposed to keep those rich details. So maybe 20%. Now looking at that, the highlights are way too high. We're gonna bring that down because that's snow, right? The snow is so bright here, so I have to be very careful with that when I lift up the exposure. You know what? I can bring the blacks down even a bit more. Maybe to about 35, and whites seem okay. The highlights are still strong. Okay, so far that is looking okay. Here's the before, after, right? Just nice contrast, fairly low color, nice contrast. Still the desaturated photos, just like my landscape, just the portraits. Now here's where I use the HSL tab a little bit. With portraits, you are dealing with skin tones, okay? With landscape, you're not. So you really got to make sure those skin tones pop. They need to look they need to be on point, okay? They need to look very, very, very flush, very like warm, peachy almost, you know what I mean? Like they don't want to look yellow or dead or gray. Like that's the first thing people look at with a portrait, their skin, their face. That has to be on point. So because I desaturate the photo a little bit, her skin tones get a little desaturated. I don't want that. Oh, voice crack. I don't want that. So what I do is I click here, and I'm gonna bring this up about 15 to 20, her skin tones. Maybe, let's bring, okay, so I can see it's on orange. Let's try that about 15. Already that's looking a lot better. Look at that, from 15 to 0, look very close to her skin. Ready? It's not much, but it's enough that it makes a difference. So yeah, maybe about 20% we'll keep it to, just to keep her skin tones nice and warm. Now, if we overkill it, you have to be very, very careful you do not overkill it too, because then they look very processed, it looks very cakey, like they're wearing a lot of makeup. The photo looks muddy, it does not look good. Like the skin tones will make or break, like write this down, the skin tones will make or break your portrait. If they're off, here's too saturated. Look at that, right? Just look at that. That looks like she's wearing, like she just went tanning. Like a horrible tanning accident happened. You don't want that. Where on the other hand, let's go too bleak. Look at that. That's exactly what I mean, right? She looks like a ghost. It just looks off. So you gotta make sure it's on point. What I usually do is bump it up about 15 to 20. 10 to 20 normally. I'm gonna leave it at about 15, that looks good to me. Okay, and that is looking okay. Might even bang up the contrast to 30, but so far that's looking good. I might even bring the saturation to about 20%. And that's it. Here's the before, after, before, after. It's nice because when I brought up the skin tones, this actually, the cattails, they stood out a bit too. Okay, nice. Now let's go to the second photo. I'm not gonna copy the preset of the first one because both photos are completely different. I like to start fresh on this. I only copy a preset when it's a batch photo. Okay, so same rules apply. Let's get some grain, about 25%. Get a bit more of that rustic raw look right there. Let's get rid of that vignette slightly, about 50%. We don't want a black ring around our photos, but we also don't want it too bare. Let's move up to sharpness, around 50 to 60 as always. Get a nice, sharp, clean photo. Ignore the HSL tab for now. Same thing, standard S-curve, but more faint this time because they are portraits and we have to be very careful we do not overdo these. Very careful with this. You know, landscape's coming second in the photo. The person, that's first. All right, now let's get a nice contrast. Let's bring that down to about around 35. Looks good. White. Yeah, white's about 30. Shadows, look at this. I'm not even gonna touch shadows. You know what, like, okay, I will. I lied, I will. But very little, like 5, okay? And the reason for that, guys, look very closely at her face. I want this, because there are not too many shadows already, I want the shadows in her eyes, or maybe around her nose, or her jawline. I want to keep those there. What shadows there? They add the character, the depth, the mystery, the mood. You just don't want a very flat-looking photo. And highlights. Usually with portraits, I don't touch highlights too much. Shadows and highlights, I don't touch too much. There's not much snow in here, so maybe I'm going to bring it down to like 10. So, rule of thumb, guys, blacks and whites, get a nice contrast. Shadows and highlights with portraits, I do not play around with too much. My landscapes, I play around with immensely, because now we're dealing with the sun. We're dealing with, you have such a vast amount of photo that you have to deal with landscape. Anyways, you can check out the other tutorial for that. Okay, so let's further that contrast about 20%. You got to be very careful. You don't do too much here. You don't want to overkill the contrast. It's going to look too processed. It's going to look fake. You don't want that. And let's bump up the exposure about 15. Even 10 looks good. Okay, now when you bring this up, this is when I'll bring down the highlights a bit, because you can see the cattails are getting a bit overexposed. But that's looking pretty good. So before, after, before, after. Now, as you guys can guess, we go down to the HSL tab, go to saturation, we're going to bump up her skin tones a bit. I want this to pop, okay? So around 15 to 20 again, click her skin and drag up. Okay, well, I know it's this anyways, so I'm just going to bring this to about 15. You know, yeah. About even 12 looks good. Before, after, and that's it. Nice skin tones to me, nice contrast, nice exposure, a little bit of grain in there, and I think this is my favorite portrait from that day. I love the way her hair is falling, right? Because if you can look at the cattails, they're blowing in the wind, and the fact that her hair is also blowing in the wind, it makes it look so authentic, like it makes it look so real, you know, because if her hair was, let's just say, perfect, and it was all like pinned back perfectly, but the cattails were blowing, it doesn't match. You know, it does not match. And I feel like in portraiture, your subject must match the vibe of the background. If the background is crazy and windy, well, then your subject should be blowing in the wind too. You know what I mean? Or vice versa. I just feel like it ties it in together. All right, so those are the 2 portraits, guys. I hope you learned a thing or two from them. Again, guys, I am gonna, most likely go back and, retouch a few things here and there, as I do with all my photos. I don't just do it in one go. But yeah, that's kind of the bulk of it right there. So, okay, hope you learned a thing or two, and we'll see you guys back in my room. Peace. And that's the end of the video, guys. I hope you digged it, hope you learned something, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're new here, subscribe. What is up? My name's David Hammond, and I make videos all on outdoor photography and lifestyle. So thank you guys so much for watching. Appreciate you all. Much love. I will see you in the next one. Peace!